but I think he needs to prove himself again to kind of earn that hype back. But I think Wesley has a physique that has a little bit more star power to it. Like I've said before, kind of freak factor.
Nessa altura do campeonato não é segredo pra ninguém que o favorito da gringa realmente é o Wesley VISSERS, principalmente em relação ao Ramon. Claro que o favorito máximo mesmo da mídia maromba é e vai continuar sendo o Sebum por muito tempo. Porém, quando a gente pensa no confronto entre Ramon versus Wesley VISSERS, com certeza o favorito da gringa realmente é o Wesley. E nesse vídeo eu vou mostrar para vocês os comentários do Nick Strength and Power, mais uma vez aqui trazendo para vocês o que ele realmente acha sobre esse confronto. E como vocês puderam ver pela thumb e pelo título, dá para ver que ele realmente acredita que o Wesley é o cara que tem o melhor físico para representar a categoria Classic Physique, e ele com certeza prefere, né? O Nick tem um caso de amor aí escondido secretamente com Wesley VISSERS. E bom, eu vou mostrar isso aqui pra vocês, é um vídeo legendado, então eu dei um pouquinho de trabalho pra fazer. Espero que vocês curtam, deixem um like, se inscrevam no canal se não forem inscritos e fiquem com o vídeo.
Now, next up in the news, we've gotten a lot of updates over the past couple weeks from Ramon Dino, and typically he's one of the quieter guys when we get close to the Olympia. He's one of the guys that doesn't post as often, and I think this has probably been maybe the most I've seen him post as far as physique updates, posing videos, training videos, just everything. Going into this Olympia, Ramon has been very open with the updates. And I think similar to Samson, that shows that he's confident in how he's looking. And I think he's got a chip on his shoulder. I think it's kind of similar to Hadi Chupin. When Hadi lost the Olympia in 2023, he came back to the Arnold with a vengeance and won both of them back-to-back. And I think Ramon is looking to do that same thing, because I think the upset at the Arnold Classic was probably the biggest upset of the year. And arguably, I think one of the more surprising results of any bodybuilding show in 2024 so far. Wesley beating Ramon. And I think Ramon understands the gravity of the situation that he's in. When it comes to this year's Mr. Olympia, he's got to reclaim that spot above Wesley. He's got to beat Wesley at the Olympia. If he wants to keep up the momentum that he's had for the past couple years, being right there behind Chris, he's got to be way better than the Arnold. He's got to fix his posing. He can't be up there kind of shaky, not looking confident, not holding his poses long enough. He's got to be sharper than he was at the Arnold. And by all measure, he looks great in all these updates that we've seen. But I still wonder if it's going to be enough to beat Wesley. Because I think if we're being honest, I think the Arnold Classic really set Ramon back, at least in the eyes of his fans. He definitely lost, I think, a significant amount of the momentum that he had. And like we've talked about a lot, the conversation has really changed this year, especially after the Arnold Classic. Whereas when it was Chris and Ramon, it was all these Brazilian fans, and really fans from everywhere, saying Ramon's going to be that next guy. He's either going to beat Chris or he's going to be the guy after Chris. And now Wesley has totally flipped that conversation on its head. So I feel like if Ramon loses to Wesley again at the Olympia back-to-back, and he's on, it's really bad for Ramon. And I say that because in these updates, like I said, he looks great. He looks like he's going to be on. He looks like he's going to be better than the Arnold Classic. And with the Arnold Classic situation, you had Ramon going on vacation like 6 weeks out from the show. It doesn't sound like he prepped very long, or at least didn't prep very seriously until about 6 weeks out from the Arnold. So what I'm saying is, if he comes in totally on at the Olympia, better than the Arnold, he's not screwing around, he's prepping hard, he comes in with a really good look, better conditioning than the Arnold, etc., and then still loses to Wesley, I think he knows the damage that does to the status that he had as kind of the heir to the throne. And I think with Wesley, if Wesley comes in better than the Arnold and he beats Ramon, or an on version of Ramon, Wesley's definitely next in line. And I think this year might arguably be the most important Olympia for a classic physique competitor to want to be the guy that's runner-up to Chris Bumstead. And I say that because I think Chris is going to win. And I also still think he's going to retire. So whoever is runner-up to Chris this year, That's going to be the guy that's talked about all year in 2025 leading up to the Olympia as potentially the next guy. And it's going to be interesting to see who's able to fill those shoes, because those are big shoes to fill. And that brings me to Wesley. Wesley's a big dude, and Wesley recently did a guest posing. He also recently posted another physique update at 3 weeks out. And I think Wesley is a guy that has the potential to fill the shoes of Chris Bumstead. Because here's another real thing to think about. Not just from the aspect of competitiveness or at the actual Olympia competition itself, but think of what Chris did for classic physique as a whole and the eyes that he brought to the sport. When he's gone and he's not competing, the next guy that wins the classic physique Olympia is going to have a pretty big burden following in his footsteps, trying to maintain that same level of eyeballs. And I think Wesley and Ramon would both do a good job of this. Obviously, Ramon has that massive international fan base, but I think he needs to prove himself again to kind of earn that hype back, even though I'm sure he's still beloved in Brazil. But I think Wesley has a physique that has a little bit more star power to it, like I've said before, kind of freak factor. And you look at him in this guest posing, and I would say the one thing that I always point to with Wesley that could be construed as his weakness would be his legs. And in this guest posing, his legs, to me, look bigger. They've always been pretty separated. They've always been pretty conditioned. He's always had a good amount of detail. But the proportion of his legs to his upper body is off. And I think that's something he's been working on. Because I remember early in Wesley's career, Wesley talking about how, you know, when Classic Physique started, Classic was supposed to be this homage to the golden era of bodybuilding. And back then, they didn't have super big legs. And they didn't even necessarily have legs that matched the muscularity of their upper body. It seemed a little bit less important back then. I mean, obviously they still had good legs, but it certainly wasn't the same as what it is today, the importance that it is in modern open bodybuilding, the size of your legs. So Wesley had said in earlier videos that that was like intentionally part of his look, because Classic Physique was kind of just beginning back then, and they were still trying to figure out exactly what this division was going to be and what the standard was, and that's the standard that Chris ended up setting. So bringing it back to this guest posing, you look at Wesley's physique. You know he's going to bring a similar stage presence as Chris. He's a taller guy, he's a more muscular guy, he's heavier, higher weight limit, etc. You know he's going to bring conditioning. You know he's going to bring detail. You know, whatever he's doing now with Stefan seems to be working very, very well for him. To me, his legs look bigger in this guest posing. I do think, however, his legs have always looked more impressive from the front than they do from the back. And for that reason, even if he's able to beat Ramon, which he's already proven he's able to do, if Wesley surpasses Ramon at the Olympia this year, I still think he's not going to beat Chris. But I think Wesley's physique brings enough of that wow factor that he can stand with Chris, and it would be really entertaining and even maybe look competitive. But I think it is interesting to think about when it comes to Wesley and Ramon, who, you know, this battle for second place that we've been talking about. And you consider Chris Bumstead's potential retirement, there will be a void that comes with Chris leaving. And when you think about those two guys, and I guess this will be the question for you guys to answer in the comments down below. When you think of those two guys, Wesley and Ramon, and maybe you're thinking Urs in second or somebody else, but whoever is behind Chris this year, who do you guys think would best fill the overall void that's going to be left by Chris? Not just in terms of their physique winning the Olympia, but just across the board, the impact that Chris had, the following that he had, the eyes that he brought to the sport, the success in business and everything else. I mean, you really couldn't have asked for a better ambassador than Chris was for a brand new division. I mean, think about how recent that 2016 was when this division was created. And for Chris to come in within the first couple years of that division and totally just bring massive popularity to this new category, which arguably now might be, in terms of numbers, the biggest of all the categories. If you look at the Olympia qualified competitor list, how many guys are there, how many classic only pro shows there are, how many amateur classic guys there are, it might be the most popular division in terms of participants. And I think a lot of that is owed to Chris. And that's no disrespect to Breon, no disrespect to Danny Hester, who was the first classic physique Mr. Olympia, but I don't think that division really took off until Chris came in and won.